What's up, guys? Today it's another edition of the Powerlifting for the People podcast. I'm Coach Caglione. This is Caglione Strength. And today we're talking about the American dream, losing weight and gaining strength. Question I get often asked, because maybe on the surface it seems like I'm getting stronger, and I'm doing my best to mitigate any muscle loss. I'm doing my best to keep any strength gains. So let me backtrack a bit. If this is your first time listening, I'm Coach Caglione. I'm a strength coach. I've been involved with powerlifting and coaching for over 13 years. And, I'm currently in a weight loss journey, especially over the last 3 years, but my weight is yo-yoed up and down. I've struggled with my weight for most of my adult life and during my childhood as well. At my peak, I was 340 pounds, and today I'm sitting about 220. So, lost well over 100 pounds and kept it off, and I still got a couple more pounds to lose because I'm looking to compete in the 198 class, which happens to be the weight class that I started in when I was powerlifting as a teenager. My first meet was in the 198 class, so I'm looking to kind of go back to where I started. The super heavyweight days are long behind me, so obviously, as a powerlifter, as a strength coach, strength is very important to me. But I kind of made a decision, basically back in like 2015, 2016, around the end of 2015. I wanted to put my health first. And I wanted to set a better example for our team, set a better example for just anyone that was kind of viewing our content. I got very strong for myself, nothing earth-shattering, but I'll just kind of go through I think it's worth understanding some context about where I'm at and where I was. So as a super heavyweight lifter, I was able to achieve a 900-pound squat in competition. This is all multiply, this is all equipped. I was able to achieve a 575 bench in competition. Also, as a super heavyweight lifter, I've done as heavy as a 640 deadlift. My best deadlifts ever, I've done a 660 deadlift at 275 in competition, and I've also pulled 700 in the gym as well, weighing in like the high 200s, in like 285, 290 range. And truthfully, I think that when I was 285, 290 range, that's actually when I was at my strongest. I was also able to squat like around 700 pounds in sleeves around that time. I've done, 750 squat and knee wraps as well. I've pulled 635 for a double conventional. So, not to say, I'd like to just again provide some context for you guys. And so as I've lost weight and lost body fat, my lifts have certainly gone down. Some of the issues is just due to leverage. Some of the issues is actually just due to just mass moves mass. And I've also kind of been over the past year specifically, I've been dealing with some shoulder issues, and part of that is just really competing and losing weight at the same time, which again I don't really recommend. It's just something that's helping me mentally stay on track, and I'll kind of explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it in a little bit more detail. But one thing that has been cool is that as I've competed, I competed in 275 class first, and I elected to just do a deadlift only meet in the 275 class because I knew the deadlift was going to improve with the weight loss, since I knew that my leverages would improve. So that was the first order of business, and then at 242. I achieved a 1,900 pound total at 242, and that actually granted me my best Wilks ever. And then in 220, just with basically with a token bench because my shoulder was hurt, I was able to hit an 1845 total. So in each meet after that, I was actually able to improve my Wilks score. So to me, that was a win. And to me, also, I was establishing new totals in different weight classes that I have never competed in equipped lifting before. So in a sense, am I stronger? In one sense, sure. Yeah, maybe pound for pound I am. But absolutely, I'm not. Absolutely, I'm weaker. But I'm not really concerned with that. But one thing that has been cool throughout the process, I've been able to maintain a good portion, almost all, not quite all, but within a few pounds. I've been able to, according to the InBody and DEXA scans and all that good stuff, I've been able to maintain most of my muscle mass. And I do believe part of that has been due to the heavy lifting and also some of the nutrition protocols and just dietary guidelines I've been following. And again, I've learned from many people over the years. I've gotten help from numerous people. And I'll kind of explain kind of what I'm doing now and then what I've also maybe kind of done in the past. But I'm definitely learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about myself. So one of the things I want to kind of go over first, if you are interested in losing weight and gaining strength yourself, I think it's important to kind of understand some of the drawbacks to this. Well, the first thing I think that's important, and I wanted to lead off with this, I think the first thing that's really important, one thing that I think is I think that this day and age, some of the more popular lifters also have great physiques and are great performers. So I think that's a positive thing. But I think there still is a select amount of people that will just gain weight for the sake of adding pounds to their total. And I think that there is a time and a place for that. But definitely using myself as an example, I definitely was not patient enough. I gained the weight too quickly. So if you're in one of those situations where you feel like you need to put some size on in order to improve your powerlifting total, in order to get stronger or whatever, to achieve whatever goals you have, I think it's really important that you have either a coach, a training partner, a mentor, a nutritionist that you can kind of have monitoring from or to kind of hold you accountable. Because I know for myself, I kind of use that as an excuse to kind of eat poorly, just eat way too many calories, ate too much junk. And I wish I could have gained the weight slower over time. It's tough, especially in the beginning when you start to see your totals go up and your numbers go up. You get that kind of positive reinforcement. And then all of a sudden you don't realize that you've kind of put on 60, 70, 80, 100 pounds of body weight. And a good portion of that for me was fat. At my heaviest, I was over 40% body fat. And now I'm under 20%, which is still not great, to be honest. It's not amazing, but I'm in a healthy range now, and I'm happy about that. So I just wanted to kind of say, in America in particular, I'm not saying just in powerlifting, we have an obesity problem. And I think that we need to really put our health first, whether we are a competitive lifter or not. And I think there's definitely going to be some times where we prioritize competition over health, or we may sacrifice some things, we may take some risks. And I think that for me, competition has helped me stay focused and driven and gave me something to work towards. So I think there's a lot of benefits to competing, but you just want to make sure that you don't take it too far where it starts to impact your health or impact your longevity. And I know kind of longevity is something that people throw around a lot, but basically my feeling is that if you love something, and I love powerlifting, and I love strength training, and I love lifting heavy, so I want to do this for a long time. And the route that I was going, I was not going to be able to do it for much longer. I was in really poor health. I was not feeling great day to day. I felt like, I was going down a really bad path. So I had to kind of pump the brakes. And I think what I'm doing now is maybe not the smartest ideas in terms of competition, but by setting goals in different weight classes and dropping down. And I know Vincent DiCenzo has kind of done a similar thing, and I think that he'd be kind of worth following as well. If you're not familiar, Vinny DiCenzo is, I believe, one of the only people, if not the only person, to bench 600 in 3 different weight classes. He's also 600 raw. He's also benched 900 pounds equipped. He's one of the most accomplished bench pressers that I've ever seen. And he's a great all-around guy. And he's kind of done a similar thing where he's, I think more recently, I think he did, he actually did a full powerlifting meet, which is really cool because I know, he was a bench specialist for many years because of a lower back injury. But yeah, he kind of used that as a tool to get his weight down, and he is looking shredded. So something to consider. But going back to what I was saying before, the pros and the cons. But basically, one of the things I think that if you're a powerlifting competitor like I said, the cool thing about still competing and still trying to work towards gaining strength, you're going to have some sort of tangible deadline, some sort of tangible goal you're working towards. So for me, when I signed up for 275 initially, I had a goal of making 275. And then after I hit 275, I was able to check that box off. Then I was able to do the same for 242 and the 220s, and now for 198s. So it's allowed me to progress one weight class at a time, which was more manageable. When I was 340, thinking about making 198 was a little bit too outside of, it was just way too far of a lofty goal and just like not really within reach. But by just going one weight class down at a time, so like my first like goal was just to kind of get under 300 pounds, and then once I was kind of around that 300 mark, I knew that 275 was within striking distance. And then once I was 275, I was able to get in striking distance at 242, and then once I was 242, I was able to get within striking distance of 220, and now that I'm 220, I'm going to be within striking distance of 198, and so on and so forth. So I think that is one way you can kind of use powerlifting as a weight loss tool and a health tool. I think one of the other benefits of trying to chase strength and weight loss at the same time is that it's going to force you to use heavy compound movements, and this was also a mistake I made, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But a lot of people, when they're doing weight loss programs, they're doing endless amounts of cardio. They think that they need to actually stop squatting and deadlifting and benching and stop doing heavy compound movements. So they end up losing a lot of actual body weight, but they also end up losing a lot of muscle mass as well. And we want to try to preserve as much muscle mass as possible. So by kind of chasing strength a little bit, even if it ends up not going up, or if you end up just maintaining a bunch of it, it's going to help keep your muscle mass on. That was one thing that I definitely learned. The cons, some of the drawbacks is that you can't let your ego and your head get in the way. Especially when you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to have some workouts that just don't go your way. You're going to have some workouts that you really got to back off the weight or the volume. You're going to need to learn how to fuel yourself properly with the minimal amount of fuel, and we'll get into that later. You're going to have to lower your expectations for maybe what you do in a competition. You're going to have to kind of let go of what you used to do in a certain weight class. You need to establish new PRs and new standards and new milestones. I would say every like 20 pounds or so of weight loss, or if it's more than like 5 to 10% of your actual body weight. I wouldn't even compare, so I'm not going to ever compare my 242 numbers to my 220 numbers, or I'm not going to compare my 198 numbers to my 220 numbers. So like once you get into like a new weight class realm, I don't think it's kind of worth comparing. And it's certainly not worth comparing my 220 numbers or my 198 numbers to my super heavyweight numbers. It's just I'm a different person at that point. So I think there's going to be a mental shift that needs to happen, and that's definitely one of the drawbacks. And that was probably one of the hardest things to do. And one of the things originally I thought I thought I maybe had to step away from powerlifting for a bit, but I just found that did not work. So like I said, some of the mistakes that I've made in the past was completely going on these really aggressive calorie deficit diets with a lot of cardio. Sometimes I would do up to an hour of cardio a day. This was before I started this. This was so I'll kind of backtrack a bit. One of my first weight, and I was successful with this, so I don't want to. Anyways, I was working with a coach at the time, I was doing, and there was a lot of positives to this, and the training was excellent. I was probably it was one of the times I was the strongest I ever was. But there was a couple of reasons for this. So I actually did get stronger, and I did improve my total while dropping about 60 pounds. But a couple of caveats to this was I was coming off an injury, so that was something. So I was recovering from an injury. I was also just getting into like multiply lifting, so I was still kind of learning the technique. I didn't really have any kind of quote unquote true like powerlifting gear as far as my lower body. I was still like learning the sumo deadlift. So in a sense, I was almost like a novice lifter. And if you take a novice lifter who has no experience and like no basic technique, you could certainly, and if they have a lot of body fat to lose, which I did. So I went from like 340 to about 283. I was able to get stronger mainly because I was still like learning the equipment. I was still like learning the gear. And I was still kind of newer to, like I said, multiply. So even though I maybe had about 5 or 6 years of raw lifting under my belt, it was a completely new stimulus to me. So that was something to consider. So if you are a novice lifter and you have a lot of body fat to lose, it's absolutely in the cards that you could definitely lose weight and gain strength. And in fact, it's probably going to happen. But one of the things I realized during that time, I ended up like doing what was called a Carb Nite diet. So basically, I would go like virtually zero carbs for the first for about 6 days, and then I would have a quote unquote carb night where I would kind of refeed and refuel and just have a bunch of carbs. And it would be a big cheat meal with a lot of carbs and sugar and things like that. And that worked out pretty well for a while. I was able to I squatted 850 at 283. I hit over a 1,900 pound total. And I think my best total at the time was like in the 1,700. So I mean, I got a lot stronger, and I hit my first 800 plus squat, and I was only wearing briefs only. So I was getting pretty strong, especially in my squat. I remember that particular day at that meet, I had missed a 600 pound deadlift really close, and I remember I wasn't even upset because we were deadlifting at midnight. It was just like a poorly run meet, and so what can you do, right? So anyways, there was a lot of positives there, but as I've got more mature as a lifter, I started, to kind of let my body weight creep up a little bit. So there was a couple of times over the next couple of years where my weight would yo-yo between, 285 and 335. And when I was over 300 pounds, my squats and bench felt great, but my deadlifts did not feel as great. So I was just trying to find that sweet spot, and then eventually I just kind of started to get some health problems. But kind of going back to what I was saying before, I felt like my only success in weight loss was anytime I would have to go really, really low carb and a lot of cardio. And as I've gotten older and more advanced as a lifter, I felt like that really hurt my strength gains, and it really hurt my performance in the gym. And also I felt it was not sustainable. So anytime I got off the low carb plan and I went back to kind of quote unquote normal eating, I always put the weight back on. So it was not a sustainable plan for me. So that was definitely a mistake I made. So one of the things I don't recommend is any type of extreme diets, any type of extreme cardio, and I definitely don't recommend. So this was another thing during my initial stages of this last weight loss journey, or the one I'm on now. I did CrossFit for about 2 months. I just wanted to mentally kind of take a break from powerlifting, and I kind of felt like I thought I needed to just have a drastic change. And what I found was with the CrossFit, and I'm not saying this would happen with everybody, just this is what happened with me, because I have a lot of respect for all the CrossFitians out there, joking aside. But I felt very inflamed. I felt like from all like the pounding of like the high rep Olympic lifting and the box jumps and plyometrics and things like that, and it just didn't really jive well for my body. And again, at the time, I was still like in the high 200s. It just didn't really make sense. And I just felt like I wasn't making any progress, even though I was training very hard. And I was getting in better shape, and I will say it was fun, but it really didn't make sense for me as a bigger person to do that. So I opted to do more of a moderate diet approach. I kept doing my strength training as normal, and I just did more like lower intensity forms of cardio versus a lot of these complexes and things that were really kind of pounding to my joints. I use more things like the step mill and like the rower and incline treadmill walking and just walking outside. The assault bike's one of my favorites, so I just do more things like that. And and I'll kind of get to the cardio a little bit later, but I never did anything more than really like 20 minutes at a time, except if it was really, really low intensity, I might do like a 40-minute walk or an hour walk. But anytime I was on like some sort of cardio machine, it was always like under 20 minutes, usually somewhere between 12 and 18 minutes of like interval type training. And I was able to recover a lot better on that. So those are some of the mistakes I made. And one of the things I also recommend is that you do your weight loss in stages if it's important that you want to, again, lose weight and gain strength. So I would say after you lose, I I would say let's say you're really consistent with your diet and you lose somewhere between 5 to 10% of your body weight, or somewhere like a large amount for a man. So for a man, you might lose somewhere between 15 to 30 pounds. For a woman, maybe it's like 5 to 10 pounds, who's like a smaller, or someone that's just smaller in general. But so if you lose somewhere between 5 to 10% of your body weight, so like when I was 300 pounds, after I lost like 30 pounds, I think having a little bit periods of a diet break, and then maybe for like 4 to 6 weeks. And sometimes this would be longer for me, and it was definitely this past year, I definitely kind of slowed down a little bit. And I'll kind of get into that in a second, but by maintaining your body weight, like every time I would get to a new weight class, just trying to kind of maintain it for a couple of weeks was very helpful. So your body can kind of get used to its new leverages. It's because you're gonna have to alter your technique as your belly gets smaller, as your limbs, your arms and legs get smaller. Your leverages are going to change. You're going to need to adjust to your technique, and it gives your body some time to adapt, and actually allows you some time to build some strength when you're in like a slight surplus or like a maintenance calorie phase. So that's going to be really critical. So doing it in stages is key. So let's say like every 3 to 4 months or so, taking like 4 to 6 weeks of just getting like into a maintenance phase. And I'm just kind of giving some very, very rough guidelines. I could probably look at MyFitnessPal and give you a little bit more concrete data. But I think it's just really important that what's the tough thing about maintenance is that it's like you're kind of not going anywhere. So it's hard. I found that the maintenance phases were hard, but they were definitely necessary. Again, being an all or nothing guy, it was challenging, but by being in the maintenance phase, that allowed me to build some strength and get a good foundation at that time, and then kind of enter the cut again with some more strength in reserve, which was very helpful. So doing it in stages is key. You can't be in a cut year round. So after a couple of months, I would say if you're dieting really hard for like 12 to 16 weeks, then you got to give yourself like a little bit of a break for a couple of weeks and then kind of come back to it. That's something that's really helped me out quite a bit. So doing it in stages is key. And if you're not like consistent, you're probably not going to need like these diet breaks. But if you are, that's one caveat there. But if you're like super on point for and you're really killing yourself for like 12 to 16 weeks, you'll kind of know like if you need a break or not. Like if you're like thinking about like when can I have a cheat meal and you're only like a week in, like you have like the wrong mindset, So that's just a little tip there. So I'm going to throw out some tips out there that have been helpful for myself. I'm not saying this is the best or most optimal way to do it, but this is something that's really helped me out quite a bit. So as someone who really enjoys carbohydrates and someone that comes from an Italian family where we have like Sunday pasta dinners and all that stuff, keeping my carbs in check is really a good way for me to keep my calories in check. So one of my things that I found very helpful, and like I just mentioned before, I always found it very beneficial, especially as the fatter I was. Low carb diet seemed to really work for me. But the downside of the low-carb diet is I felt like my performance suffered and my workouts did not go as well. So I would recommend, in the beginning, try to figure out how many carbs and calories you need to perform while still losing a small amount of weight every like week or 2 weeks or so. So what is the highest amount of carbs and highest amount of calories that I could ingest while still being in a slight deficit? So it's kind of like, I like to use the analogy, like if you're in the gym and you're training for a powerlifting meet, same kind of thing. We want the minimum effective dose changes. So what's like the smallest amount of volume I could do to make progress? What's the smallest amount of intensity I could have to hit a PR at the meet? That's going to allow for the most longevity. You could obviously do more volume. You could have higher intensities, but you are going to peak faster and you're going to plateau faster. So it's the same thing with diet. If you could obviously go in this crazy calorie deficit week 1, but it's not going to be sustainable. So you want to try to have the smallest calorie deficit possible that you could have to lose some body fat, and then you want to take that as long as you can. And then when you start to plateau, you can start to play other cards. You could start to quote unquote play other cards. So you want to kind of save your aces in the hole and play one card at a time versus kind of playing all your cards at once. So for me, keeping my carbohydrates around my training time has been key, and I'd like to kind of keep my carbs as high as possible. And there'd also be other days. So I would also say to that, on my squatting and deadlifting days specifically, those were more challenging days. So days where I was really cared about my performance, or if I had just like a really, really crazy amount of volume, but I would just have more carbohydrates on that day. So I might have an extra serving of rice. Maybe I have a little bit more cranberry juice on that day. I might do like some oatmeal or maybe some healthy cereal. A little more Greek yogurt, some more berries. So I just have some more carbohydrates on days where. So I might have. On a really high carb day, I might have 200 to 300 carbs or even 400 carbs more than normal. On a normal, just high carb day, I might just have 100 carbs more than normal. But in general, I've been keeping, and I'm not kind of counting green leafy vegetables and trace carbs, but just carbohydrates through like rice and starches. On average, I would have anywhere from 150 to 300 grams of carbs on a training day, and usually it would be closer to 300 if it was a squat or deadlift day, and be closer to 150 on an upper body or accessory type day. And on days where I'm not training, so on Saturdays, I try to have close to 0 carbs as possible. I might only have meat. I might have meat and eggs. I might have steak. In the beginning phases, I would have fattier cuts of meat. So that's kind of my next kind of thing. Minimum effective dose changes, just like our lifts. So the first, as I would kind of plateau, I would start to cut down some fats. So some of my fat sources that I would have, I might use a fattier, early in the diet, I might use a fattier cut of meat, of red meat. So I might go from a 93% meat to a 96% lean beef, for example, on certain weeks. On Saturdays, on my high fat, low carb day, I might go from 80% burger patties to 85%, and then 85% to 90 or 93% ground beef again. I might go from eating egg yolks to eating less egg yolks, for example. I might go from eating nuts to having no nuts at all. I might have some avocado, and then I would start to cut the avocado out. So if I have some fat sources, I'm going to start to cut down the fat sources first. And then, but I never really want to kind of go below around, say 80 grams of fat, 60 to 80 grams of fat per day, just for kind of health reasons. But again, that's the way to kind of get your calories down. And once my fats are kind of at that minimum threshold, then I might need to kind of dwindle my carbs a little bit more. And I'm always going to try to keep my protein somewhere in the 200 to 220 range. When I was a little bit heavier, I was having more closer to 250 grams to 270 grams of protein a day. Just because of my calories start to get lower, I'm trying to get down to 198. So my kind of thought process is that if I want to be 198, I want to at least have 200 grams of protein a day. But even depending on the day, like I said, sometimes it might be upwards of 220 to 250. But in general, at a minimum, I'm going to get 200 to 220 grams of protein per day. And that's going to be pretty consistent. So you want to get at least 1 gram per pound per gram of lean mass. But preferably unless you're a real super heavyweight guy. But even when I was super heavyweight, 300, I was still getting probably somewhere between 250 and 280 grams of protein per day. So make sure the protein is high. It's got a higher thermic effect of food. It's going to help kind of maintain your muscle mass. A lot of benefits, obviously. I'm sure if you guys are listening to this podcast, you kind of know the benefits of protein. So that's kind of some of the smaller changes that you can kind of make over time. In the beginning, also, I went from having 8 ounces of ground beef per meal to 6 ounces. So I'm at 6 ounces now. So I went from having 24 ounces of meat per day over the course of the last couple of years to now I'm having 18 ounces of red meat per day. So these are kind of small changes over time. Having a protein shake per day, I kind of took the protein shake away, so I'm having a little bit less just overall calories. So even though that's not the most ideal thing is limiting the protein, at some point you got to take calories from somewhere. So as long as you're kind of keeping the fats at a minimum and you're keeping the protein at a minimum, then you can start to kind of play with the carbohydrates a little bit more. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you're fueling enough to kind of get your workouts in. I think that's key. So some of my quote-unquote aces in the hole that I've been kind of playing as of late is number one is adding the cardio back in. So I've been using a program actually from Ashley Cast. Ashley is a personal trainer out of New York City. Sorry, Ashley, I forget which club you work out of, but I think you work out of a couple anyway. But yeah, so she's a really smart girl. Smart trainer. So she kind of gave me I've been kind of throwing in this interval program at certain points in my training cycle, as needed, and I probably will cut it out once I get closer to the competition. But basically, in a nutshell, I'm not going to kind of give everything away, but we have like a medium intensity and a medium intensity interval day. I'll use a stair climb, like a stair step mill for that. Then we have a low intensity day, which is just like incline treadmill walking. That's going to be longer and steady state. If I have time on Saturday, I will also do another long walk, usually outside, or a little hike or something as well. And I don't really that's more for fun, and I'll do some yoga and things like that and just kind of move and stay active. And then on the third day, it's high intensity intervals, and I will do those. So that's a quick sprint followed by recovery. And the recovery is always usually at least twice. Usually the recovery is at least twice, if not more, of what the sprint is. Okay. So if I'm sprinting on the bike for like 20 seconds, I might have like 40 seconds of recovery, for example, and I'll do several rounds of that. So the assault bike is great because it's basically a concentric only movement, and I can recover really easy from it, as opposed to like I said, doing some like the metabolic kind of conditioning that you might see in CrossFit with a barbell that would tend to beat me up. But the assault bike will really kick your butt, get your heart rate up, and I feel like I could really recover like after it. So that's really helpful. And obviously paying attention to my recovery, like while we're on the topic, is going to be important. So I've been doing more yoga, trying to get more parasympathetic. I've been doing more, getting massage twice a month, and just doing some general soft tissue work. So the more like my calories drop and the more intense my training gets, the more I got to pay attention to my sleep, my hydration, my recovery. So that's kind of also worth mentioning, is making sure, especially if you're going lower carb, and limiting your carbohydrates, limiting your just food in general, limiting your processed foods. It's really important you supplement with some sodium. I really like the LMT powder. Noon tabs are great as well. So I think the electrolyte supplements can be key. So potassium, magnesium, sodium, all those things are important for muscle contraction and other bodily processes. And the last ace in the hole that I've been kind of playing is some fasting. So one thing that I think I want to just kind of make sure that you guys are aware of, I never am going to go into a workout fast, and I'm always fed, because I know some of our members kind of maybe tried doing some of that. So I don't recommend doing that. I know some people do, but my recommendation and what I do for myself, I always have a pre-workout meal with carbs. I always have a post-workout meal with carbs, and I always make sure I have electrolytes and water. I usually have a liter of water with about a gram of sodium. Again, this is just me personally, pre and post-workout. So that helps me stay hydrated, helps me with my muscle contraction, helps me with my recovery. So I've been doing some intermittent fasting, which has been really helpful for me. Just by keeping the feeding window shorter and more condensed, it's allowing me just easier to stay on track. And what's great is if I just know if my feeding window is done, I don't have to think about, do I need to eat again? Am I going to have to go to a gas station to get food or eat out? When the eating is done, it's done. I don't have to think about it. There's no meal prep for fasting, which is great. So typically, my first meal might be anywhere from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning, depending on when my training is. And then I will finish my food somewhere between 1 and 3 o'clock, depending on. It's really probably closer to 1 to 2, but depending on the day and how my errands run and things like that. So usually the window is pretty, it's maybe a 6 to 8 hour window on a typical day. And then once per week, I've been doing a minimum of a 24-hour fast, going from Friday into Saturday. I'll usually try to cut my food off on Friday a little bit earlier, just to make the fast a little bit easier. So I'll cut my food somewhere between 11 and 1 o'clock on Fridays, and then I will fast for a minimum of 24 hours. I'm kind of experimenting with cycling the long fast. 1 week a 24-hour fast, 1 week a 27-hour fast, and 1 week a 30-hour fast. So this past weekend, we competed in the Newark World Championship, RPS World Championship meet, or I guess it was RPS Conquest of the Gods, so I was able to kind of coach that whole meet fasted, and I didn't have my meal until 5 o'clock that night, so I fasted from 11 on Friday till 5 o'clock the next night. So I did my first 30-hour fast. And that's allowed me to kind of get a bigger calorie deficit in just that one day. So it's kind of helped me kind of, drop my body fat a little bit quicker. And then once I break my fast, I'll usually have a good amount of like ground beef and eggs on that particular day. And then Sunday's usually a higher carb day because it's usually a more challenging kind of squat workout. And that's what I've been kind of doing as of late. I'll probably need to control my carbohydrate a little bit more on the high carb day. I've been kind of using that as like a refeed type day. But the weight's still dropping, so I'll kind of see like what my weigh-in is this week, and then we'll kind of make adjustments from there. But that's kind of what I've been doing as far as weight loss, and those are some tips for like losing weight and gaining strength. What's the best way to go about it? What's my philosophy, and then what's also been working for me. So just realize that, just to kind of recap everything, that you can't serve two masters, you can't ride two horses, so it is probably best to just focus on one at a time. But if these are two kind of overlapping goals, which I think they are going to be for a lot of people, do it in stages, understand the pros and the cons, try to make sure that you use the minimum effective doses both in your training and in your diet. And I think that's going to serve you really well. And just remember, if you have some aces in the hole, only try to be patient and play them when you need to. So if you guys enjoyed the podcast, please give it a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. If you want to support the program, you guys can check out the links below. Every little bit helps. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.